Welcome, everybody. Let me just here we go. Hello, my name is Amy Patterson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council, which is the umbrella for Connecticut's land conservation community, serving mostly the state's 120 or so land trusts. And we are delighted that you are here today for this workshop on state conservation funding options. CLCC provides a host of services to Connecticut's land trusts and their communities. And one of the programs that we advocate for, as well as provide input into through our participation in the State Open Space Review Board, is the Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program, which includes the Urban Green and Community Garden Program. And we work very, very closely with our colleagues at the Land Acquisition Management Office, and we're really proud of the progress that's been made in terms of not only how much has been achieved by way of land conservation and urban green space development through those programs, but also the partnerships that have developed as a result. So without further ado, I want to turn the program over to my colleague, Lindsay Sir, who is the Director of the Office of Land Acquisition Management at DEEP. And they oversee these programs and some of the others that you will learn about today. So welcome, everybody. And we do ask that you try to hold your questions until Lindsay is done, at least done with a program. And then if we start to get too many questions and it's taking away from the time to get to the other programs, we'll wrap that part up and wait until the end to answer the rest of them. But for now, it's a small enough group. I think we can take some questions as Lindsay goes along.
Yeah, I think what I'll do, so the first three programs that I'm going to present on are all ones that are managed by my office. So I'll go through those first three and then we'll stop for questions. And then I'll present on a few others that other parts of our agency manage. And since I am not experts on them, I'll try to answer your questions at the end of that section as best as possible. And then, we can get you answers afterwards if I can't answer them for you. Okay, so let me.
One other thing, Lindsay, is that feel free to post your questions in the chat, and I'll monitor those as well. If you don't feel like raising your hand during the presentation, we certainly can grab those questions as Lindsay goes along through the chat. All right, I will monitor the room, the waiting room here, Lindsay, and you can get going. But thanks, everybody. And please do stay on mute while Lindsay is presenting, and come off mute when you're called upon for a question.
So I'm assuming everybody can now see that. Amy, if you can say yes. Yeah. Okay.
I can see it. Yes. Thank you.
So as Amy said, I'm Lindsay Sir. I'm the Office Director for Land Acquisition and Management here at Connecticut DEEP, and our office has a broad reach. We do all the land acquisition for DEEP from the state side, and then we manage a series of grant programs that I will be talking about today, as well as we work on any kind of legal agreements for use of state lands for other purposes. So we have a small but mighty staff of 5, soon to be 6 employees, and yeah, so it's a great office to work for, and I'm excited to share some of our grant programs. So let's see. So the first one I'm going to talk about is our Urban Green and Community Garden Grant Program. So there were some statute changes in this last session prior. So some of the things that you might have known about for our Urban Green and Community Garden Program have changed slightly. So one of the things is our applicants. So now eligibility for applicants is a nonprofit and municipality. Either can apply for that program. And previously it was only municipalities. So nonprofits could be partners. But they couldn't get money directly from the state for this program, which was an issue for, having agreements with the municipality necessarily. And also it just took longer to get money through the door for the groups that were actually doing the work. So the statute changes now allow for nonprofits to get reimbursed directly. That can be on nonprofit land, or it can be if a nonprofit and municipality are working together, but the nonprofit is the one that's doing the work, they can be reimbursed for the project on the municipality's land as long as there's an agreement in place between the nonprofit and municipality. Additionally, with statute changes, previously the project site had to be located within a distressed municipality or a target investment community. And the statute changes also added environmental justice community to that list of the locations. This added about 48 additional communities that now qualify. And I'm going to show a map a little bit later in the presentation that kind of identifies the locations where these additional communities are located. So program specifics. So this program is set up for creating, enhancing, restoring urban public community spaces. So the program can fund entire projects if the expenses within that project are compatible with the eligible expenses that are listed below. So professional services, minor structures, tool sheds, and typically it's for projects like rain gardens or bioswales or native plantings or native gardens or community gardens or walking pathways. Those are sort of the general range. We're open to other ideas that folks have, but we have to make sure that it fits with what the compatible expenses are. Now we also allow larger projects. So say you're doing a park project that includes, a basketball court and a tennis court and a splash pad, but there's a section of that project that's going to have native plantings or storm water abatement in the form of rain gardens or bioswales or native plantings or, passive walking pathways. We can pay for that portion of the project and you can match with the other non-compatible expenses. We allow that to be matched to our grant program. So we can't necessarily pay for that basketball court or the splash pad, but we can pay for expenses that are ancillary to that project so that some of these larger projects have additional funding. There is a 50% match required, but as I said, we're pretty flexible in what qualifies. So infrastructure expenses from a larger project can count as match for eligible expenses within this program. You can also have donated materials, donated professional services, volunteer labor that can count as the 50% match. We haven't had a ton of issues with people having trouble getting match because we're so flexible with the types of match that we use. For this program, application is relatively streamlined. There's not a ton that needs to be submitted to us for this application. We need to know who the owner of the property is. We need a description of the project, the community need. We need some sort of drawing to show the site plans. It can be hand drawn. We have gotten ones that are hand drawn, or they take a Google map and they draw on the Google map to show exactly where they're looking to do things. It doesn't have to be a professionally drawn site plan for this grant program. We also need pretty good budget tables. So item, the unit cost, what's counting as match and what's counting towards eligible expenses for this grant program. And then we would like to see local support letters and an explanation of how this fits a community need in this area. So since 2007, 2.8 million has been provided through this program. I don't think that's as much as we would like to be seeing. It's generally underutilized. And I think partially because when it was first established, it sort of became a community garden only program, despite the fact that it can pay for things other than community gardens. So we're really encouraging communities to think outside the box. If you want to do a community garden, that's great. It can fund that. But we also, the green infrastructure, including rain gardens, native plantings, extra things that you would think about for a large project, we are willing and capable of funding through this program. So we're hoping to get some good projects through this next round. And then for more questions, My colleague Jamie Sidoriak is the lead for this program, so you can reach out directly to her. You can also reach out directly to me, and one of the two of us can answer questions on this. I'm going to do two more and programs, and then save your questions, and we'll stop and answer some questions on these first three. So the next grant program I want to talk about is Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program. So this purpose of this one is to purchase permanent interest in land. So either the entity is going to own the land, or they will purchase a conservation easement over property so that is protected into the future. So eligible entities include municipalities, nonprofits, land trusts, and water companies. Funding for this program is based on fair market value of the property acquisition. With recent statute changes, we have added environmental justice communities, which are similar to that UGCG program, Urban Green and Community Garden Program. It's those 48 additional communities across Connecticut that if the project acquisition is in one of those communities, that or a targeted or distressed municipality, you can get 75% of the fair market value. If it is not in one of those communities, it's 65% of the fair market value. And then also new, based on statute changes, is that there is reimbursement of incidental costs. So that's survey costs, legal costs, appraisal costs, other costs associated with acquisition can now be reimbursed through our open space program in targeted, distressed, or environmental justice communities. So I will show a map just a second. So if you take a look at this map that is opening, this is on our website, and this is also in our grant materials. If you go on our website and you can look, there's a link to this. So previously, before statute changes, only the ones that are in red or slightly pink, plus it's not showing targeted communities, but there's a lot of overlap, were the only ones that qualified for additional funding through our open space program, and the only ones that qualified for our urban green and community gardens. So now all of these communities that have orange, little orange blobs on this map that don't also have coverage by one of those other colors qualify for this funding and additional funding through open space. So it's about 48 additional communities. The projects have to be within these orange blobs to be able to get the funding, increased funding through our open space program, and also to get the funding through our urban green and community gardens program. But there's additional communities that qualify for this. So for our OSWA program, there's a score sheet that's available on the website with all of our materials. And there are four main areas. So we have scoring based on our administrative and community support, which is including mapping, some of the background legal work, and support letters and past grant compliance. Then we have public access and outdoor recreation. So one of the main goals of this program is to provide public outdoor recreation for the citizens of the state. So a conservation easement will be put in place in favor of Connecticut Deep that ensures that this property will be open for the public into the future. So that's something that comes into the scoring. And then we have a section on environmental justice and equity, which includes community impact, proximity to public transportation, and also mixed income housing proximities. And then the last section is on our climate change and natural resources. So how does this property help protect, forest resources and agricultural and wildlife and fisheries resources? And the last thing on this program that's key to our application process is that when you submit your application, you also have to submit an appraisal, a yellow book appraisal, and an appraisal review to with the application process, the deadline for that is slightly after because there's a little bit of a struggle to find appraisers in Connecticut. So we understand that. So we gave a little bit of a buffer on the deadline for the appraisals, but that has to be something that is included with your application because we have to know what the fair market value of this property is before we can determine what the grant amount will be awarded to you. So this program has been very successful since 1998 when it started, 172 million, protecting 46.5 about acres across Connecticut. And Allison Clark is the key staff in this program. She's been working on it for 15 years probably. She knows the program in and out, and she's a great resource for anybody looking to ask questions on it. And then this last section I'll do before I'll open it up for questions. We have additional funding through a program called the Highlands Conservation Act. It's funding from the federal government, from Fish and Wildlife Service. And there are the eligible entities are the same, municipalities and nonprofit, but it must be within the Highlands boundary. So I'll show a map in a minute. We don't solicit separate applications for this. So it's solicited through our OSWA grant application process. And we do that because it kind of makes the money move further. You don't need an additional application, which simplifies things. And if properties qualify, they can be combined with our state funding for up to 90% of the project costs. So 90% of that fair market value, which is pretty good. The program priorities are pretty similar to what we say for our OSWA climate and natural resources section: forest, water supply, wildlife, public recreation. And then here is the boundary map, the current boundary map. All the towns in this shaded are all currently eligible to get Highlands funding through projects, nonprofits, or municipalities. There is also work that's being done to slowly expand this boundary to include more. That won't be for this year, but we're hoping that in the years to come, that this funding will be available, even further east in Connecticut, closer to the Connecticut River within a few years. So this funding has been very successful as well, 14.5 million, 5,500 acres through Highlands. And our staff person that's in charge of this program's name is Matt Starr, and this is his contact information. So I'll pause there. I don't know if we want to, let's see.
There are a few questions in the chat, Lindsay, and then I'll keep scrolling. And please raise your hand using the little function at the bottom there, the reaction function.
Let
and
me,
can't do that.
let me stop. I was going to say stop sharing for now.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Did I stop?
You did. Well, no, you didn't.
There we go. There we go.
All right. So the first question is from Dennis Main. Can you layer an OSWA and a community grant together where there may be some suitable arable land on the larger conservation parcel?
Yes. So here's the one issue. Our open space grant program does not allow for like significant infrastructure. So if you wanted to do a park project that had like a splash pad or something, we couldn't do it. But if you wanted to acquire it and do a community garden on it with no permanent structures, I think we could make that work with the combined funding sources.
Also, CLCC has a climate smart land stewardship program that does provide funding to land trusts for planning and implementation grants to undertake climate smart projects. And that's a very, very broad category of land stewardship projects. And so some of the types of community garden activities like a pollinator area might also qualify for funding under the Climate Smart Land Stewardship Program. And I'll put that link in there. I did put another link here when Lindsay was talking about transaction assistance for targeted distressed and EJ communities for various due diligence costs. CLCC does have a program, a grant program for that purpose as well. So if your land trust doesn't qualify under DEEP's new categories of eligibility, you can look to see if you would qualify through CLCC's transaction assistance. Okey doke.
And then I see another question from Christine about mapping.
Yep.
We are not partial to any one. If whatever mapping program works best that can provide what we need to see, that works for us.
And then a link to the map for distressed communities. Lindsay, I can search for that.
So if you go on our website, I can put the links in. I can put the links in later, but if you go on our grants kind of manual, there's a list of the distressed and targeted communities. It gets up, well, the targeted one doesn't update that much, but the distressed one gets updated yearly based on OPM's numbers for however they calculate it. So that will get changed regularly year over year. And there's typically a 5-year grace period. So if there's a community that is a distressed municipality one year, and then they're not considered the next year, there's a 5-year grace period where they still qualify for our funding after that.
A couple of questions here. The next one is on UGCG. Lindsay, can you submit one grant for multiple locations, or do you need to do a grant application for each location?
So what I would say is we've accepted grant applications for multiple locations if the project is substantially the same. So say you wanted to do 5 community gardens at all different locations across the city, that's doable. If you wanted to do walking paths or native plantings across, 5 different ones, or that, if they're completely different projects across the 5, I would say submit them as separate projects because it's just hard to track and to score when they're vastly different across the different properties. I hope that makes sense.
And if not, please add another question for a clarification. I do see a hand up from Christine. Let's just go to one more in the chat, Christine, and then we'll take your question. Any assistance given to acquire land as a nonprofit? This would be to create a community garden, pollinator pathway, or nature center.
So if you wanted to acquire property for a community garden or pollinator pathway, you could acquire it. This is what Dennis was asking before. You could acquire it via our open space program, and then you could use our urban green and community garden program for helping to build the community garden or the pollinator pathway. Nature center would be a little different because it's a structure. Our open space program, the way the statute is written right now, it doesn't allow for infrastructure, permanent infrastructure on the land. So that probably wouldn't be compatible, but for some of the other uses, you could use both programs in conjunction with one another.
Great. Okay, Christine, you want to unmute yourself? There you go. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. I just thought this would be a little easier than typing it. So I've been going through the scoring for the OSWA grant, and I noticed that there appears to be 30 points that are only accessible if you have a previously funded OSWA acquisition. And I'm just trying to understand, is the grant application like intentionally biased to keep funding people?
No, so we had that question when we were developing the new updated. If you have never applied for a grant before, you're going to get that 30 points.
Oh, that's great to know. Thank you so much. Okay,
because you don't have any grant compliance issues, you're going to get that 30 points.
I see. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Anybody else before I move on to some programs I don't know as much about?
Meanwhile, I'm going to go out of the room and pull up the FAQ. And I'm also going to put some links in the chat for the OSWA grant page, UGCG grant page, and the FAQ that Lindsay was referring to that has that list of towns that qualify as or categorized as targeted and or distressed.
David, do you mind coming off mute and explaining what your question is on that? Happy to answer. I want to hoping to clarify.
Sure. Sorry, it took me a minute to get off mute.
That's okay.
So I I'm working on my smartphone here, and the map I could see was pretty small, and it looked like New London is in a targeted distressed New London, Connecticut is a targeted distress area. Yet Waterford is immediately adjacent to that to the west. And we have both board members and other people who enjoy the open space that we provide to New London, because there's not a whole lot of open space left in New London itself.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if consideration is given in that regard, or any thought was to the fact that people sometimes who don't have accessibility can get it in the next town over.
Yeah, so it was funny, before we started this meeting, Amy and I were actually just talking about that because we've gotten some questions on, the way that the statute changes were changed. It has the environmental justice communities qualifying, but we know that anytime that you draw a line, right? So these are based on census blocks. So there's going to be a line. There's always going to be some property that's next door that probably serves that area, but isn't qualifying for that additional funding. Now, that's something maybe we can change in the statutes in the future, but it's not something that will qualify right now. But I will say that the scoring, the way the scoring is set up, if you were Waterford and you're providing public access to New London, to that EJ community, you're going to score higher in our process within the scoring criteria because of that. It's just that you won't qualify for the additional funding if you're not in one of those communities. If that makes sense. It's we value that, obviously. That's not something we take for granted. And we've talked about can we make it so that the statutes say, that are serving those communities, but then how do you define that in language? And so it's tricky, but we hear what you're saying and definitely take that into consideration as we move forward.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? Let's see. I see Amy put a bunch of links in there to some of our home pages and our frequently asked questions. And yes, Brian, that's also where public transportation comes in. So that's also within our scoring criteria. If your property has public transportation access, we take that into account, and you would score higher in the rankings as well. Okay, so I will share. Let's see if I can get back to where I was. Let's see. Okay, hold on one second. Okay, here we go. Okay, so some of these programs, as I said before, they work in conjunction with some of the funding programs that my office manages, but they are managed by separate offices within DEEP. So one is additional funding for coastal land acquisition. So this funding is provided through the federal government, through EPA, and it's administered by our Land and Water Resources Division. So eligible entities for this one are, municipalities, nonprofits, and federally recognized tribes. But the project for acquisition has to be located within their Long Island Sound coastal boundary. So there'll be a map in a couple slides that shows you where. Their program priorities line up relatively similar. There is a Long Island Sound management plan, which kind of defines what the priorities are. and it's mostly, you know, wetlands, riparian buffers, it's ecosystem benefits, public recreation, and then uh, they have a specific focus for environmental justice areas. So here's the boundary. There's a little leeway in this boundary, so you can see, you know, kind of a line that goes through various towns further north. And I think they also, if it's up a river and it, you know, serves a valuable resource down into one of these areas, it also can qualify for funding. So if you're close to a boundary with any of these properties, I would say come and ask questions of the deep staff to see if it qualifies. We were doing this program also through our OSWA grant program, but they just set up a kind of a separate thing for the next few years. So it's a separate grant application for this one as well. This is additional funding also through our Water Resources Division. It's competitive funding through NOAA. We haven't had a lot of success in this program yet because it's for larger parcels. So you have to think really big, maybe combining sets of parcels together. But it has to compete at the national level, which is hard with the size of our parcels. So if you have a really big project that's the coastline, this is a program that could potentially help fund it. But otherwise, I would say potentially the other program I just talked about, the EPA Long Island Sound one, might be a better fit. This one's just for municipalities, not land trust, but land trust can obviously be a partner. And then this is a slightly different zone that qualifies for this funding. So priorities are very similar, overlap with some of the other ones, coastal areas, environmental justice communities are a focus, and public benefits, public access. And you can see the overlap is similar, but this goes by municipalities. And I think the boundaries for this is much stricter. So you would have to be within one of these municipalities in order to qualify for this funding. Mindy Goslin in our Land and Water Resources Division is the contact for this, and she could answer questions. She could send you whatever application materials they have. They will, I think they're going to be opening a round for it soon, but if you reach out to her, she can get you more information. Another program that kind of works in conjunction with our open space grant program is the Rec Trails program within our Parks Division. This is for nonprofits, municipalities, state departments, tribal governments to support trail projects. So that can include designing and construction of trails, maintenance and restoration. It can also include acquisition of land for easements or easements for trails. So you can combine funding. You know, if it's a primarily trails project, you could combine our funding with their funding to fund this project. But they are pretty strict on what they consider acquisition for trails. So it can't be, you know, funding a 200-acre property with like a corner of it having a trail. It has to be really focused on trails acquisitions. Requests should be less than $1 million. And then they can pay 80% of the total project costs, which is a pretty good match. Kim Bradley from our Parks Division is the primary contact. And if you search, you know, outdoor recreation trails in Connecticut, their website will come up and this funding program will also come up. We also have programs through our forestry division. So one is called Forest Legacy. It's funded through the Forest Service, and it's a slightly different program because it funds the purchase of conservation easements on private property. It has to also be within a forest legacy area. So there's areas designated in Connecticut that qualify. I think at one point they were trying to get the whole state to qualify, but I don't think that's the case at this point. It has to have a multi-resource management plan, so forest stewardship plan every 10 years. So that's something that has to constantly be happening. And it will pay up to 75% of the conservation easement value. Similar, things that they're trying to protect, climate resilience, aquatic habitats, public access. It's not required, but I would say it counts in the scoring for this program. So if a project isn't going to have public access, it might score lower at the national level and not get funded. Land trusts and conservation organizations cannot be direct applicants for this program, but they're basically the state acquires the conservation easement. So a lot of times we partner with land trusts to help us think through you're the local eyes and ears on the ground, municipalities, COGs, everybody here are local on the ground eyes to kind of put together parcels that work together to create a larger forest legacy application. And those parcels will stay in private ownership, but they will get a conservation easement to Connecticut Deep to protect them into the future. So 37 tracks in Connecticut, 9,600 acres, and over $1 million from this program since 1994. Additional forestry resources is our community forest program. This is also through Forest Service, and it's a nationally competitive process. So local governments can apply, nonprofits, and federally recognized tribes. The property has to be at least 5 acres and 75% forest. The focus of this program is on community forest plans. So, having active forest management, education on the properties, and the property or the funds can be go towards the purchase price, but can also help with the due diligence costs. So the legal requirements, the survey costs, the appraisals for getting this done. Priorities, as I said, active forest management is one of the priorities. Again, public recreation and educational opportunities. This is a pretty underutilized program in Connecticut, I think partially because it's nationally competitive, but I think, it's a valuable resource that we could be tapping into more in Connecticut to do some land conservation work. Dan Paracchio in our forestry division is a forest planner, but he leads both the Forest Legacy program and the Community Forest program. So you could reach out to him for questions for either of those programs just to learn more. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is our Brownfields grant program, which is new. There was funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law that's their DEEP is using kind of in conjunction with Department of Economic Development's programs for brownfields, but this one is geared towards sites that are going to eventually become open space, greenways, or flood mitigation. So the funding can go to nonprofits or municipalities, and it's for environmental assessment and or remediation projects. So there will be about 800,000 annually until 2027. There's no minimum request, but the maximum request is 250,000 for assessment or remediation work on a site. And DEEP is committed to awarding 60% in environmental justice communities. They announced relatively recently, I think that they're going to be announcing a new round soon. They were hoping summer, but with timing, it might get pushed to like early fall. So it should be announced soon for the next round of funding. And Amanda Limisher and Mina are the two contact people for this program. They can answer better when they're going to be announcing the next round and any specific questions that you have on how the funding can be used. So that's all I have. I'm open to additional questions. I will end the slideshow and
You have some in the chat here, Lindsay.
yeah, let me stop sharing. There we go.
All right, so the first one's a comment.
Yep.
Saying it would be nice to have a portal designed in collaboration with GIS office. basically, I think it's like a heat map, you know, to show the different layers of categories that impact eligibility, similar to the source water protection program. And
Yep.
Christine provided a link to one map here from through Circa. But I know we're
I
working
will,
on.
well, and I would say that internally we've been having a lot of discussions with all the different grant programs across DEEP to say, we need an online solution where people can apply to grants online. We need an eligibility tool that people can use to, so those are all things that internally we've been having conversations about. I know that OPM is testing out some online grants management programs with other agencies. So we're hoping that potentially some of that might come over to DEEP in the future. It's in the works, but you know, with state government, it might still be several years. But I do know that all of our grants management staff has been talking about both those things and hoping to get them in the coming years.
Thanks, Lindsay. Next question is about having the video link, the video and the links emailed. Yes, we can definitely do that, Jacqueline, and we have all of you as registrants, so we will be sure to get that information out. CLCC actually this month in our e-newsletter, our monthly recap, is going to provide links to the recording, links to much of the information that we've discussed today. We also had a workshop a week or so ago about CLCC's programming, much of which is really complementary and can be used as you know, to help you with your OSWA grant projects. So that information will be available as well. And Brian asks, what is the maximum percent funded for OSWA plus rec trails? 90%? Question mark.
Yeah, so if they were both approved for grants via our program, you can only get 90% when you combine state and federal sources of funding. So it would be up to 90% of the fair market value. So if you got approved through the Rec Trails program for 80%, we could pay additional 10% of that program to get you to 90%, if that makes sense.
All right. And I had put a link to, we have a grants page that we continue to update as grants come in, not only from the state level, not only private opportunities, but also federal grants. And there's so much money out there now. And if you have questions about those grant programs, in addition to those that Lindsay has talked about today, please don't hesitate to contact us at CLCC and we'll get you the answers or direct you to the people who have them. And Christine, could you please share the link? Oh,
yeah,
ahead,
for
Linda.
the Coastal Land Acquisition Grant Program through our Land and Water Resources Division, I'm not sure what information they have up online yet, but I know that they're working on opening around in conjunction with some other grant programs they have. So there should be something up there soon. But I would say stay tuned and reach out to the contact listed there when Amy sends the link. Mindy Goslin, she's your best contact for where the information is and what you know what's available out there.
And the last comment here is Brian put in a link to the community forest program. And, you know, something else that we can help you with is if you're looking to talk to a land trust that has taken advantage of some of these, if not all of these programs, so you're looking for some direct on the ground experience with the funding source, please contact us and we can generally connect you with a land trust that has that experience. And I think I got to the bottom of the list here. Did I miss anything? Please raise your hand or just jump in if I did. Or if you have a question that's arisen since, please go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in. No other questions? Lindsay, any final thoughts, advice?
Thank you all for joining us. Please, no question is a dumb question. Please reach out with questions. We are we want to answer your questions and we want to be getting as much funding as we can out the door. So please reach out. And hopefully we can help you through the process if there are some questions or, you know, issues with things you're looking at when you pull up those applications. Hopefully some of the materials for our open space program are they've changed. So when we did the statute changes, we did an update to our grants manual and our scoring sheet so that they align with the application and it's hopefully flows pretty well. But if you have questions on any of that, please reach out as you're looking at it.
And I just put our emails in the chat if you want them at your fingertips. And with that, it's 1:47. We have ended early. Good for us. And please, please take Lindsay up on that offer to ask questions. And of course, the same goes to you for all of us or from all of us at CLCC. This is why we're here, to answer your questions and direct you to the right resources. So don't hesitate to reach out about any of these programs and others that we might have on the website that you think could be relevant to your work.
Yeah.
So with that, thank you all so much and have a great day. Get out there.
Thank
It's a
you.
beauty. And we'll talk soon.
All right. Have a good one. Bye, everyone.